The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists at 6:47 in the evening, in front of 30 witnesses, while my 8-year-old daughter screamed my name from the sidewalk. The officer had my federal judicial credentials in his hand when he put them on me. He hadn't read them. He had looked at a black man walking out of a diner with a small white girl and decided he already knew everything he needed to know. What he didn't know was that the city of Hargrove would spend the next 14 months trying to undo what he did on that sidewalk, and fail to the tune of $2.2 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually started. That Tuesday had begun the way most Tuesdays did. I was up at 5:30, made coffee in the French press Lily had given me for my birthday. Dark roast, 2 minutes of bloom, then a slow, careful pour, and sat at the kitchen table while the house was still quiet. The morning light came in pale and thin through the bay window, and I watched the neighbor's cat pick its way across the frost-covered lawn with the focused dignity of an animal that answers to no one. My chambers at the federal district court would be waiting in 3 hours. The briefs would be waiting. The 14-year sentence I was reviewing for a man who might be innocent would be waiting. But for now there was just the coffee and the silence and the particular piece of a morning that hasn't been touched yet. Lily padded in around 6, still in her pajamas, her blonde hair a spectacular disaster. She was 8 years old and had been my daughter for 4 of those years, officially adopted after a foster placement that became the best thing that had ever happened to either of us. She dragged her chair next to mine without a word, and climbed up, and I pushed my coffee cup toward her so she could smell it, which she did every single morning and always pretended to find revolting. "Gross," she said, wrinkling her nose with enormous ceremony. "Then why do you do that every morning?" I said. She considered this with the absolute confidence of someone who has never once had to justify herself. "Tradition," she said, and reached for the cereal box. That was us. Me and Lily, and the house on Pemberton Street, and the French press, and Tuesday mornings. I had been a federal judge for 6 years. I had been a father for 4. The second job was harder, paid nothing, and I was far better at it. We had a standing tradition. Every Tuesday after school, if my schedule allowed, I picked her up and we went to Caldwell's Diner on the corner of 5th and Morrison. It was nothing fancy. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, slices of pie turning slowly under glass domes on the counter. But Lily had decided, with the unshakable conviction that only an 8-year-old can bring to a minor food opinion, that Caldwell's had the best grilled cheese in the known universe. I was not in a position to argue. The owner, a heavy-set man named Earl, who laughed as though he found everything genuinely funny, always called her Miss Lily, and brought extra pickles without being asked, because she had once told him pickles were her favorite food, and Earl apparently took customer feedback with the seriousness of a Michelin inspector. I picked her up at 3:15 that afternoon. She had a spelling test to report on, and a complicated social situation involving 2 friends, and a dispute about whose turn it was to be the leader of some game whose rules I couldn't fully map, and she narrated both with equal urgency the entire drive over. I listened, asked questions at the right moments, and pulled into the small lot next to Caldwell's at 3:30. It was cold, that particular thin-aired cold of early November in the mid-Atlantic, and Lily had her hat pulled down to her eyebrows and was already reaching for the diner door before I'd even locked the car. We ate. She had her grilled cheese. I had a club sandwich and coffee. We talked about the spelling test and the friend situation, and she wanted to know whether judges could be friends with criminals after a trial was over, which led to a conversation that I found genuinely delightful, and that I think quietly confused her. Earl brought a slice of lemon pie on the house, as he did every other week with the air of a man performing spontaneous generosity, and Lily ate it with the focus of someone defusing a device. I left the usual cash on the table. I always overtipped at Caldwell's, because Earl paid his people fairly, and they deserved the gesture, and we gathered our coats and our things. Lily took my hand as we walked toward the door. My briefcase, containing active case files with the seal of the federal judiciary, was in my other hand. It was 6:44 in the evening. Through the glass door I could see the sky outside had gone to that deep blue-gray of a winter dusk, and I remember the warmth of the diner air on the back of my neck as I pushed the door open and stepped onto the sidewalk. He was there before I had fully registered that he was there. The officer was white, mid-30s, with the particular build of someone who had played high school football and never entirely let go of that identity. His patrol car was parked half up on the curb with the lights off. He wasn't responding to a call. I would learn from 2 independent witnesses, who later gave formal statements, that he had been standing on the sidewalk, watching through the diner window for several minutes before we came out. He had been waiting. "Hey." His voice was flat, not aggressive yet, just that performative authority that patrol officers know how to occupy, like a physical space. "Where are you taking her?" I stopped. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes over me in courtrooms when something outrageous happens, when a witness lies badly, when evidence falls apart, when a lawyer says something that crosses a line so obvious you almost admire the audacity. It isn't calm exactly. It's the temporary suspension of all feeling while the brain finishes processing the full scope of what it has just received. I felt that stillness on the sidewalk outside Caldwell's diner. "I'm sorry," I said. "The girl." He nodded at Lily, who had gone very quiet beside me, her hand tightening around mine. "Where are you taking her?" It was not a question the second time. His hand had moved to his belt, not to his weapon, but to that general territory of implied authority that certain officers learn to inhabit. "This is my daughter," I said. My voice was level. I had spent 20 years in and around courtrooms before I took the bench, and I knew how to keep my voice level. "Can she confirm that?" Something ignited in my chest, slow and cold, like a pilot light catching in a dark room. I was 51 years old. I had been a black man in this country for all 51 of those years. I knew exactly what this was. I had hoped, with the particular stubborn hope of someone who keeps collecting evidence against it, that it would not find me here, on a Tuesday, in front of my daughter. "She is 8 years old," I said. "I need you to set the bag down," he said, "and step away from the child." Lily's grip tightened until it hurt. "Daddy," she whispered. "It's okay," I told her, though it was not okay in any dimension of the word. I did not put the bag down. I reached slowly and deliberately into the inside breast pocket of my jacket and removed my credentials. The official identification card issued by the Federal District Court of the Southern District, bearing my photograph, my full name, my title, and the seal of the United States Judiciary. I held it out to him with the flat, measured patience of a man who has presided over 412 federal hearings. He looked at it. Something crossed his face in that moment, and it was not recognition, not recalibration, not anything resembling an appropriate response to what he was holding. What crossed his face was the decision to continue anyway. That decision, made in under 3 seconds on a sidewalk in front of 30 people, would cost the city of Hargrove $2.2 million. But he had already made it. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." The cuffs were on my wrists before the diner door had finished swinging closed behind the last customer who had followed us out to see what was happening. Earl was standing in the doorway with his dish towel over his shoulder, absolutely still. 3 people in the window booth had their phones out and recording. 2 women who had been walking past had stopped. A man walking a dog had stopped. A couple coming out of the pharmacy across the street had stopped. 30 people. I counted them later when the witness statements came in. Lily was standing on the sidewalk with both arms wrapped around herself, and she was screaming my name. Not crying, screaming. with the full-lunged certainty of a child who knows something catastrophically wrong is happening to her father. And that sound, her voice, high and absolute and terrified, is something I have carried with me every day since. The officer put me in the back of the patrol car. My briefcase, containing files bearing the seal of the Federal District Court, sat on the sidewalk behind me. He had my credential card in his hand, and he still had not read it. He had not asked my name. He had not asked Earl, who was now walking toward the car, with his phone pressed to his ear, and a look on his face I had never seen there before. What he knew about me. He had seen what he had decided to see, and he had acted on it. And now I was in the back of a police cruiser watching my daughter through the rear window as a woman from the sidewalk, a stranger, knelt down and put her arms around Lily. And Lily buried her face in the stranger's shoulder, and I pressed the back of my head against the cold plastic partition and breathed. The pilot light in my chest burned steadily. I let it. They brought me into the Hargrove 5th District Station at 7:02 in the evening. Officer Dale Reuter, I had his name by then, from his badge, walked me through the processing area with his hand on my arm, like I was a flight risk, past a desk sergeant who looked up once and looked away, past a young officer who stared at the floor, past a woman in civilian clothes who watched the whole thing with an expression I could not read. My credentials were in Reuter's shirt pocket. He still had not made a single call. I was placed in a holding room, not a cell, technically, just a room with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a smell of industrial cleaner and something older underneath it. And the door was shut. I sat down. I put my hands flat on my thighs to stop the shaking I had only just noticed, and I focused on my breathing the way I had learned to do during my first year on the bench, when the weight of the sentences I was handing down had started following me home and sitting on my chest at 3 in the morning. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The room was small, and the fluorescent light buzzed slightly, and somewhere down the corridor a radio was playing something I couldn't identify. I thought about Lily. That was what I could not contain. Not the handcuffs, not the indignity, not the 30 witnesses, not the legal catastrophe that was already assembling itself in my mind with the calm, inevitable precision of a brief being written. Lily, her face in the rear window, the way she had buried her face in a stranger's shoulder because there was no one else. I had told her it was going to be okay, and then I had been driven away, and she was 8 years old. I knew someone would have called my clerk by now. I knew Marcus would already be on the phone, already pulling the thread. But knowing this did not touch the thing that had lodged itself behind my sternum since the moment I had heard her scream. The door opened at 7:29. I know the exact time because I had been watching the wall clock with the focused attention of a man who is building a timeline, because timelines are what I do. Timelines are what courts run on, and I was already building this one brick by careful brick. The man who came in was not Reuter. He was older, a lieutenant's insignia on his collar, and he was carrying my credential card in front of him the way you carry something that has already burned you once. His face was doing something complicated, not quite horror, not quite apology, but the specific expression of a man who has already received 3 phone calls from people significantly above his pay grade and has walked down a very short hallway to deal with the consequences. "Judge Ellison," he said. The room went very quiet. Not that it had been loud, but there is a quality to silence when a mistake is fully named. "Lieutenant," I said. I did not stand up. He opened his mouth and I watched him search for words that would do the work he needed them to do, that would acknowledge the scope of what had happened without fully acknowledging it, that would offer something without offering accountability, that would be sufficient without being adequate. He was looking for the sentence that would make this manageable. There wasn't one, and somewhere in the 12 steps it had taken him to walk down that corridor, I think he had already known there wasn't. There's been a... He started. My daughter, I said. Just that. 2 words. I kept my voice completely flat. He blinked. She's with... There's a woman, a bystander. She stayed with her. We've got someone. I want to speak to her in the next 60 seconds, I said. Or I want to speak to your captain in the 60 seconds after that. Those are the 2 options available. He left and came back with a phone in under 45 seconds. Lily's voice came through the speaker, small and precise, and trying very hard to be brave. Daddy, are you okay? The lady said you were okay, but I need to hear you say it. I'm okay, I said. I'm coming out. I need you to stay with the lady for a few more minutes. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Then quieter. Were you scared? I looked at the fluorescent light buzzing in its fixture above me. A little, I said. But not anymore. Okay, she said. Me neither. Which was not true for either of us, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. They released me at 7:51, 49 minutes in total. No charge filed, no paperwork completed, no reason given. Reuter was not in the corridor when I walked out. The lieutenant walked me to the front entrance without speaking and held the door open with the careful courtesy of a man performing an act of contrition that he knows is entirely insufficient. The cold air outside hit my face, and I stood on the steps and breathed it in. Marcus, my clerk, was parked at the curb with the engine running. He had driven 40 minutes from the other side of the district. He was 28 years old and had been with me for 3 years, and he had the particular quality I valued most in the people around me. He did not panic, and he did not fuss, and he did not say things that didn't need to be said. He looked at me once when I got in the passenger seat, assessed something, and handed me my phone without a word. Lily was in the back seat. She launched herself into the gap between the front seats and held onto my arm with both hands and did not let go for the entire 40-minute drive home. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me, and at some point past 2 in the morning I got up and went to the kitchen and made coffee, and sat at the same table where I had sat 12 hours earlier, with the quiet and the French press and the neighbor's cat crossing the frost. That cat was not there now. The yard was dark and still. I thought about what I was going to do with the next 6 months of my life. By 3 in the morning, I had stopped thinking and started deciding. There is a difference, and it matters. Thinking is what you do when you are still weighing options. Deciding is what comes after the weight is done, when something inside you simply becomes still and clear and certain, like water settling after it has been disturbed. My hands had stopped shaking. My voice, when I said a few words aloud to test it, was even. I was no longer the man who had stood on that sidewalk and felt the pilot light catch in his chest. I was the man who had been sitting behind a federal bench for 6 years, and I knew exactly what evidence looked like, and I knew exactly what it built toward, and I had 30 witnesses, 4 phone recordings, a lieutenant's visit at 7:29 that created a documented timeline of institutional awareness, and a credential card that had been in Reuter's possession from the moment of arrest. I called my attorney, Vivian Cole, at 7 the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. I had known Vivian for 15 years. She had argued 3 civil rights cases before my court before I took the bench, and she had won 2 of them. She listened to the entire account without interrupting. Not a single word, just the sound of her breathing and the occasional faint scratch of a pen. And when I finished, there was a silence of about 5 seconds. The recordings, she said. At least 4 that I know of, possibly 6. The credentials were in his hand. From the moment I produced them. Another pause. James, she said. She was one of 3 people in the world who called me by my first name without ceremony. I need you to understand that what you're describing is not a complaint. It is a case. I know, I said. It's going to be a year of your life, maybe more. I know that too. And the city is going to come at Lily. They're going to say she was distressed by the incident. They're going to try to characterize the whole thing as a misunderstanding. They're going to look for anything. Vivian, I said quietly, I know what they're going to do. I've been watching them do it for 20 years from the other side of the courtroom. She exhaled slowly. Right, she said. Okay, I'll need everything by end of day. The city's attorneys made their first approach 6 weeks in, through channels designed to feel informal. A mutual acquaintance, a lunch that wasn't quite a lunch, a number mentioned in the way that numbers get mentioned when institutions are hoping you'll take the off-ramp before the real road begins. The number was $400,000. I had Vivian decline it in writing, which created a document which I wanted. The second approach came at 4 months, through official channels this time. The number had become 800,000. I had Vivian decline it in writing. Another document. At month 7, Officer Dale Reuter gave a deposition. I was not in the room for it, but Vivian sent me 14 pages of transcript that evening with 3 passages highlighted. The first was his answer to the question of whether he had read my credentials before placing me in handcuffs. The answer, under oath, was no. The second was his answer to the question of what had caused him to approach me on the sidewalk. The answer, reconstructed from his own words, amounted to a black man and a white child, leaving a building together at dusk. The third was his answer to the question of whether, if the child had also been black, he would have made the same approach. There was a long pause in the transcript. Vivian had written approximately 11 seconds in the margin, and then the answer was, probably not. I read those 14 pages at the kitchen table. The French press was in front of me, its coffee going cold. I read them twice, folded them carefully, and put them in the file that had been growing on my desk for 7 months. The pilot light was still burning. It had been burning quietly and steadily the entire time, and I had learned not to mistake steadiness for extinction. The trial date was set, and then a settlement conference was scheduled for the week before. I attended with Vivian. The city's legal team was 4 people in expensive suits who had the particular manner of people accustomed to being the most powerful presence in any negotiation. They opened at $1.4 million. Vivian put a document on the table, a single page, and the senior attorney picked it up and read it and put it back down with a stillness that told me everything. It was a media inquiry log. 47 journalists who had been in contact with Vivian's office since the story had broken in month 2. National outlets, the kind that ran things above the fold. 2.2, Vivian said, and a formal written acknowledgement that the stop was without legal basis. The room was very quiet. The senior attorney looked at his colleagues. He looked at Vivian. He did not look at me, and I found that interesting. We'll need to consult, he said. Of course, said Vivian, with the serene patience of a woman who already knows the answer. The acknowledgement was signed 11 days later. The settlement was finalized 3 days after that. Reuter was separated from the department. Not fired, because these things are rarely clean, but separated through a process that generated paperwork that would follow him professionally for the rest of his life. The city issued a statement. I did not read it carefully. Statements are for managing perceptions, and my perception no longer required managing. That was 14 months ago now. On a Tuesday morning in January, I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when Lily came downstairs. Same pajamas, different spectacular hair disaster. She dragged her chair next to mine and reached for the cereal box, and then she stopped and looked at me with the focused assessment of a child who sees more than you expect. You seem different, she said. Different how? I asked. She thought about it with genuine seriousness. Like the quiet kind of different, not the sad kind. I looked at her. This person who had been my daughter for 5 years now, who had screamed my name on a sidewalk and then told me she wasn't scared when she was, who had sat in the back of Marcus's car and held my arm with both hands for 40 miles. "Yeah," I said, "the quiet kind." She nodded as though this confirmed something she had already worked out, and reached again for the cereal box, and the morning light came through the bay window and lay across the table between us, pale and clean. I picked up my coffee and drank it. It was the first cup in 14 months that tasted exactly the way it was supposed to taste.